My name is Nguzi, and I am from a small village in the southeastern part of Nigeria. I was a young girl when I first met Chijioke, a sailor with a reputation that sparkled like the stars. He came from Lagos, and his wealth was evident from the first day I laid eyes on him. He was tall, well-dressed, and his smile seemed to light up the world. It didn't take long for me to fall for him. He had everything a girl like me could ever dream of: money, charm, and an air of mystery. At first, I didn't know much about his background. All I knew was that he was rich, and that alone was enough for me. I didn't care about his past or who he was. I had always lived a modest life in my village, and to see this man who could afford anything made me believe I was lucky. Chijioke would visit my village frequently, and whenever he came around, he showered me with gifts. Expensive jewelry, beautiful clothes, and sometimes even cash. I had never seen so much money in my life. He promised me a life filled with comfort, love, and happiness. He would tell me stories of the places he had been, the adventures he had experienced on the seas. I believed every word, my heart swelling with love for him. After some time, Chijioke asked me to marry him. I was overwhelmed with joy. The thought of becoming his wife made me feel like I was the luckiest woman in the world. He promised to take me to Lagos, where we would start a new life together. He told me that his family would accept me, and that I would be treated with respect and love. It all seemed too perfect to be true, and I didn't question anything. I didn't even think to ask if he had other women in his life. Why would I? He was giving me everything I had ever wanted. The wedding was simple but beautiful. My friends and family were excited for me, and I couldn't wait to leave the village and start my new life. My heart was full of dreams of the future, of living in a big house, wearing fine clothes, and driving a car. I was in love, and I believed that nothing could go wrong. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a story I would come to regret. Chijioke's promises were sweet, but behind them was a darkness I couldn't see. I was about to enter a world I wasn't prepared for, and I would soon learn that the price of love isn't always what we expect. When Chijioke and I arrived in Lagos, everything was different from what I had imagined. The city was bustling, filled with people and cars, lights, and noise. It was a sharp contrast to the quiet life I had known in the village. He took me to a beautiful house in a posh area, and I was in awe. This was the life I had always dreamed of: luxury, comfort, and plenty of space. I quickly adapted to my new life, meeting people from all walks of life, attending social gatherings, and enjoying the privileges that came with being married to a wealthy man. However, there was always something strange about Chijioke. He was never around for long periods. Sometimes, he would leave without a word, only to return weeks later, bringing me expensive gifts as if to make up for his absence. He never told me where he was going, and I never asked. After all, he was a sailor, and it made sense for him to be away for extended periods, right? But it was the little things that began to raise questions in my mind. I noticed that Chijioke's phone would often ring in the middle of the night, but when I asked who it was, he would always dismiss it with a smile, saying it was just business calls. He was always busy with work, but his presence would vanish the moment he came home. I began to feel a sense of loneliness creeping in, but I pushed it aside. What did I have to complain about? I had a beautiful home, all the money I could ask for, and a husband who provided for me. It wasn't until one day, when I decided to follow Chijioke to one of his business meetings, that I began to suspect something was terribly wrong. He left the house early in the morning, and I decided to get into a cab to follow him. I wasn't sure why I did it, but I felt this inexplicable need to know more. What I saw that day changed everything. I followed him to a large house on the outskirts of Lagos, and when he went inside, I saw two women standing at the door, smiling as they greeted him. I felt a tightness in my chest as I watched the scene unfold before me. My heart raced, and my mind went into overdrive. Who were these women? Why did they look so familiar with my husband? I waited in the car for what seemed like hours, trying to calm myself down, but my thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and anger. Chijioke eventually came out of the house, but he didn't see me. I watched him drive off, and I followed him back home, but my mind was filled with questions I didn't have answers to. When I confronted him that night, he was defensive and dismissive. He assured me that the women were just friends, but I didn't believe him. The look in his eyes when he spoke told me there was more to the story than he was willing to admit. But I was too afraid to dig deeper. I loved him, and I didn't want to lose the life we had built together. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. After all, he was good to me. He gave me everything I could ask for. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And as time passed, I would soon learn just how right I was. It didn't take long for the truth to hit me hard. A few months after my confrontation with Chijioke, the tension in our home grew unbearable. He became more distant, and I found myself spending more time alone. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, just as I was about to settle into bed, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was greeted by two women I had never seen before, but something about their faces made my heart sink. They introduced themselves as his wives, his first and second wives. Their presence was overwhelming, and the shock of seeing them made my mind spin. I tried to keep calm, but I could feel my hands trembling as they explained that Chijioke had deceived me. They told me how he had married each of them years ago, one after the other, and had kept them hidden from me. They had been living in the same city, just a short distance from me, while I was living in a bubble, believing that I was the only one. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. The man I had given my heart to had betrayed me in the worst way. Not only had he lied to me about his marital status, but he had also kept this secret from me while I had borne his children. The pain of that moment was unbearable. One of the wives, who was older and more composed, spoke first. "Ngozi, he has two of us already. You are just his third. And trust me, you won't last long. We've dealt with women like you before, and we will not let you ruin what we have built." The other wife, younger and visibly angry, added, "You are nothing but a side dish to him. Don't think you are special. We'll make sure you never see him again." I stood there frozen, unable to speak. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of anger, disbelief, and hurt. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him so completely? Chijioke had made me feel like I was the most important person in his world, but in reality, I was just one of his many women. The two women left after that chilling exchange, and I was left alone in the house, staring at the door they had just walked out of. I tried to process what had just happened, but my mind couldn't keep up. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The days that followed were filled with emotional turmoil. I confronted Chijioke when he came home that evening. He tried to deny everything, but the evidence was right in front of him. The wives had spoken the truth. I demanded an explanation, but he only offered weak excuses and apologies. He told me that he never wanted me to find out, that he had planned to tell me eventually, but it was clear that he was only trying to protect himself. I was angry, hurt, and broken. I had 2 children with this man, and yet, I had never truly known him. I began to feel a sense of betrayal that ran deep within my veins, but I didn't know what to do. Should I leave him? Should I fight for my family? But how could I fight for something that had never been truly mine? Over time, Chijioke's behavior worsened. He became more controlling, showing little affection for me and more attention to his other wives. He started to make excuses for why he couldn't be home, and soon, he stopped coming home altogether. My life, once filled with dreams and luxury, had become a prison. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel more and more like a stranger in my own home. Chijioke would come and go, but each time he returned, it felt as though he had become a different person. The man who had once showered me with love and affection had turned into a shadow of himself, distant and cold. It was as though the love we once shared had faded, replaced by a sense of emptiness that hung heavily in the air. One evening, after returning from a long trip, Chijioke came home and sat me down. His face was unreadable, and I could feel my heart racing as I waited for him to speak. When he finally opened his mouth, the words that came out were like daggers to my heart. "Ngozi," he said quietly, "I think it's time we end this. I've made my choice. I'm going back to my first wife." I felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, after the children, the life we had built together, he was just going to leave me. I asked him why, but his reasons were cold and emotionless. He told me that I wasn't what he needed anymore, that he had made a mistake by marrying me. He said it wasn't about me, but about what he had been through with the other wives, how they were the ones who understood him better. As he spoke, I felt a deep sense of loss wash over me. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, was gone, replaced by someone who no longer cared for me. I had given him everything, my heart, my body, my soul, and in return, he had betrayed me. He left that night, leaving me in the house with our 2 children. I sat there, numb, unable to move or speak. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I could hardly breathe. The dreams I had once had about the future, about a family, about love, were now shattered into pieces. I couldn't believe it had come to this. The days that followed were filled with pain and confusion. I couldn't understand how Chijioke could walk away from his children so easily. How could he abandon us without a second thought? I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken life, but it wasn't easy. The pressure of being a single mother, of taking care of my children on my own, was overwhelming. But the worst part wasn't just his abandonment. It was the constant reminders of his other wives. They began to contact me more frequently, sending me threatening messages and calling me late at night. One of them even came to the house one afternoon, demanding that I leave Chijioke alone. She said that he was hers, and that I was just a temporary distraction. She made it clear that if I didn't back off, they would make my life a living hell. At first, I was scared. I didn't know what they were capable of, but I had no intention of giving up my children to them. Chijioke had abandoned me, but I would never abandon my kids. Still, the threats were constant, and every day felt like a battle. I had to constantly watch my back, wondering when they would show up again, threatening me or causing trouble. I began to lose myself in the chaos. I barely slept, barely ate, and every day felt like a fight just to survive. The woman I had been, the young, hopeful girl who had dreamed of a life filled with love and happiness, was slipping away. I was drowning in the harsh reality of my life, and I didn't know how to swim to the surface. Life became a blur of endless struggles. Each day felt like I was fighting against a force much stronger than myself. I woke up every morning with the weight of the world on my shoulders, my children relying on me for strength and stability. But how could I give them strength when I felt so broken inside? How could I teach them that life was worth living when I was drowning in despair? Chijioke's absence was a constant reminder of the betrayal I had endured. It wasn't just the fact that he left me, it was the way he left. Without a word of explanation, without any consideration for the family we had built, he simply walked away. He didn't even bother to check on his children, to ask if they were okay. To him, they were just another inconvenience, another thing that didn't fit into his perfect life with his other wives. I had tried to move on, to make peace with the situation, but it wasn't easy. Every time I saw my children, I was reminded of what they had lost, their father, their stability, their future. They had so many questions, and I had no answers for them. How could I explain to them that their father had chosen to abandon them for his other wives? How could I tell them that the man we had loved and trusted was nothing more than a liar? But life didn't stop for my pain. I had to find a way to keep going, to put food on the table and make sure my children had everything they needed. I found a small job in a local market, selling fruits and vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. Every day, I woke up early, prepared my children for school, and then went to work. It was exhausting, but I didn't have any other choice. At the market, I met other women who had their own stories of heartbreak and betrayal. Some of them had been left by their husbands, others were struggling with abusive relationships, but all of us had one thing in common: we had been hurt by the people we loved the most. We shared our pain, our fears, and our hopes for the future. And through it all, I began to realize that I wasn't alone. But even though I had made new friends, the pain of Chijioke's betrayal still lingered. It was like a scar that I couldn't get rid of, no matter how much I tried to heal. And the worst part was that I couldn't escape the feeling of being inadequate. How had I allowed myself to fall for a man who had no regard for my feelings? How had I let him deceive me into believing that I was the one he truly loved? The guilt gnawed at me constantly. I felt like I had failed my children, failed myself, and failed the woman I used to be. I had put all my trust in a man who didn't deserve it, and now I was paying the price. I had no one to blame but myself. If I had only been more cautious, more aware of the red flags, maybe things would have turned out differently. But the truth was, I didn't know how to change the past. I couldn't undo the choices I had made. I could only move forward, one step at a time, and try to create a better future for my children. I didn't want them to grow up feeling like their father had abandoned them. I wanted them to know that they were loved, that they were important, and that no matter what happened, I would always be there for them. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But I kept going, for their sake. I wanted to show them that even when life knocks you down, you can still get back up. I wanted to teach them that they were stronger than any betrayal, stronger than any lie. And slowly, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had my children, my friends, and the strength to keep moving forward. And that, I realized, was enough. As time passed, I began to feel the weight of my choices, not just for myself but for my children. They were growing up without a father's love, and it broke my heart every time I saw them longing for something they could never have. My son, Chigazi, would often ask about his father, and I struggled to find the right words. How could I explain the truth to him? How could I tell him that his father had abandoned him and his sister, Nina, for another life? I couldn't bear to see the sadness in their eyes, so I tried my best to shield them from the harsh reality of our situation. I would tell them that their father loved them even though he wasn't around. I didn't want them to feel the sting of rejection that I felt every day. I wanted to protect them even if it meant lying to them. But the truth always finds a way to surface. One day, I received a phone call from Chijioke. It had been months since he had reached out to me, and I was surprised to hear his voice. He didn't sound like the man I had once known. There was a coldness in his tone, a detachment that made my skin crawl. "Ngozi," he said, "I'm coming to see the children. I want to talk to them." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. After all this time, he suddenly wanted to be part of their lives. It was as if he thought he could just waltz back in and pick up where he left off. But I didn't want to let him back in, not after everything he had put us through. I hesitated before responding, unsure of what to say. But I knew one thing: I couldn't let him hurt my children any further. If you want to see them, you can. But you need to understand that they have moved on. You can't just show up whenever you feel like it. He remained silent for a moment, and I could hear the faint sound of his breathing on the other end of the line. I know, he said finally, but I want to try to make things right. For their sake. His words felt hollow to me. How could he make things right after everything he had done? The years of lies, the deceit, the abandonment, it was all too much for me to process. I didn't want him to come back into our lives, not when the wounds were still fresh, not when the scars were still visible. When he arrived at the house, I was filled with a mixture of anger and apprehension. I had no idea what to expect. Chijioke stood at the door, looking as if nothing had changed. He was the same man who had once promised me the world, but now he seemed like a stranger. He looked at me, but his gaze didn't hold the warmth it once had. It was cold, indifferent. My children were excited to see him, though. Chigozie ran to him, his little face lighting up with joy. But Nina, who was older and more aware of what had happened, stood back, observing him with suspicion. I watched them interact, my heart heavy with emotions I couldn't explain. I wanted to protect them, to shield them from the hurt that their father had caused, but it was impossible to keep them from the truth. They deserved to know who he was, even if that meant they had to face the disappointment of knowing that their father had never truly cared about them. The visit lasted only an hour, but it felt like an eternity. Chijioke spoke to the children about his work, about his life, but he never once apologized for abandoning them. Not once did he acknowledge the pain he had caused me or the damage he had done to our family. It was as if everything that had happened before didn't matter to him anymore. He was just going through the motions, trying to salvage something that couldn't be fixed. When he left, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I didn't want him in our lives, not like this. I didn't need him to come back and pretend everything was fine. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies or visits would ever make it right. I realized then that I had to let go. I had to stop holding on to the idea of a perfect family, a perfect life. Chijioke had made his choice, and I had to accept that. But most importantly, I had to focus on what was best for my children. They deserved better than this. They deserved a mother who would fight for them, a mother who would give them the love and support they needed to thrive. And that's exactly what I would do. I would not let their father's abandonment define them. I would raise them to be strong, independent, and full of love. I would show them that they didn't need anyone who didn't care about them. They had me, and that was all they needed. The days after Chijioke's visit felt like an emotional roller coaster. I was trying to hold everything together for the sake of my children, but deep down, I felt like I was breaking apart. The quiet, lonely nights were the hardest. There was no one to talk to, no one to share my burdens with. I had tried to keep a brave face for my children, but the truth was, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the small market where I sold fruits and vegetables, an old friend from my village, Ada, came to visit. She had heard about my situation and came to offer her support. Ada had always been a pillar of strength, and I had missed her more than I realized. We had been close when I was younger, but over the years, life had pulled us in different directions. Now, it felt like fate had brought her back into my life at the right moment. She sat beside me and smiled warmly. Ngozi, I've heard what happened. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this. But you need to understand something. You're stronger than you think. This is not the end of your story. Her words were like a breath of fresh air. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that I was strong. For so long, I had felt like a victim, someone who had been wronged and abandoned. I had spent so much time dwelling on the pain, on the lies and betrayal, that I had forgotten the strength I had within me. Ada's words reminded me of the woman I used to be, the woman who had dreams, who had hope, and who had the power to make a difference in her own life. We spent hours talking, reminiscing about our childhood, and catching up on the years we had lost. Ada told me about her own struggles, about her own heartaches and challenges, and how she had learned to rise above them. She shared stories of women in our village who had overcome even greater obstacles, women who had faced unimaginable pain but had managed to rebuild their lives, stronger and wiser. As we talked, I began to feel something shift within me. It was like a light had been turned on in the darkness. I realized that I didn't have to be defined by my past, by the mistakes I had made, or by the man who had abandoned me. I could choose to be more than the woman who had been deceived. I could choose to be the woman who rose above her circumstances, the woman who fought for her happiness, for her children, and for her future. Ada encouraged me to seek help, to find ways to heal and move forward. She suggested I join a support group for women who had been through similar experiences, a place where I could share my story, learn from others, and find comfort in knowing that I was not alone. The next few weeks were a blur of change. I began to attend support group meetings and meet other women who had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and abandonment. I was amazed by their strength, their resilience, and their ability to find hope in the darkest of times. They shared their stories with me, and I realized that while our experiences were different, the pain was the same. We all carried the scars of our past, but we had learned how to turn those scars into sources of strength. I also began to focus more on my children. I wanted them to see me as a role model, someone who could rise above the challenges life threw at her. I spent more time with them, teaching them lessons of perseverance and self-worth. I wanted them to understand that they were never defined by the actions of others, that they were worthy of love and respect, no matter what. Chigozie and Ninena were growing, and I could see the changes in them. They were starting to understand that their father's absence wasn't their fault, and they were beginning to find comfort in the love I gave them. We were creating new memories, new traditions, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were becoming a family again. Though the wounds of the past still lingered, I had learned to forgive myself. I had learned that it was okay to make mistakes, to trust the wrong people, but it was not okay to let those mistakes define me. I was more than the woman who had been deceived. I was a mother, a fighter, and a woman who was determined to create a better life for her children. As I stood in the market one afternoon, watching the sun set over the horizon, I realized that I had come a long way. I had survived the darkest days of my life, and I was finally starting to see the light again. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came my way. Just when I thought I was beginning to move on, when I was starting to heal and find my footing, the past came crashing back into my life. It was a hot afternoon when I first saw her, Chijioke's first wife. I had heard rumors about her, but I never thought she would come looking for me. It was an unsettling feeling when she stood before me, her gaze cold and calculating. She was a tall woman, her presence commanding. She didn't smile as she approached me, and I could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. My heart raced in my chest, and I could feel the familiar rush of fear creeping back into my veins. "Ngozi," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to talk." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave me alone, to walk away and never look back. But another part of me knew that this wasn't going to be as easy as ignoring her. She sat down beside me, her eyes never leaving mine. "You think Chijioke is just going to let you raise his children in peace?" she asked, her tone dripping with venom. "You think you can take him away from us without consequences?" I was silent, my mind racing. I had been trying to keep my children out of the drama, trying to protect them from the pain that Chijioke's family had caused, but it was clear that they wouldn't let me. She wasn't just threatening me, she was threatening my children, my very existence. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, my voice trembling. Chijioke is the one who left. He made his choice. I didn't ask for any of this. She sneered at me, her lips curling into a twisted smile. Oh, you didn't ask for it. You think we're going to let you take everything from us without a fight? I could feel her words cut deep into me. Her arrogance, her entitlement, it was as if she believed she had a right to dictate my life, my children's lives. I wanted to shout at her, to tell her that I had suffered enough, that I had been deceived and abandoned. But I held myself together. I couldn't let her see me break. Listen, she said after a long pause. We didn't want this, either. But Chijioke has his responsibilities. He has obligations to us. You will learn that, one way or another. With that, she stood up and left, leaving me shaken and speechless. I felt a deep sense of dread settle in my chest. What was she planning? What would they do next? I had no idea, but I knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The wives were not going to let me have peace. Days passed, and the tension only grew. The second wife, Chijioke's other partner, began to reach out to me as well. She sent messages, calling me names, telling me that I was nothing but a distraction. She even accused me of trying to steal her place in Chijioke's life. I didn't understand how they could be so callous. I had never asked for this, never wanted any of it. I had simply fallen in love with a man who had lied to me, who had deceived me into believing that he was the one I was meant to be with. And now, I was being punished for it. I tried to stay strong for my children, but the stress of it all was wearing me down. I felt like I was constantly on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next confrontation. The pressure was too much to bear. I knew I had to find a way to protect my children, to shield them from the bitterness and hatred that Chijioke's wives were trying to bring into our lives. But how? How could I fight back when I had no support, no allies in this battle? How could I stand up to them when I knew they had Chijioke's backing, when they knew that he could make my life even harder? That night, as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I thought about the life I wanted for my children. I thought about the kind of mother I wanted to be. And I realized something important: I didn't need Chijioke or his wives to define me. I didn't need anyone to tell me how to live my life. I was strong enough to fight this battle on my own. I didn't need their approval or permission. I had everything I needed right here: my children, my strength, and my resolve. I didn't know what would happen in the coming days, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them break me. I wasn't going to let them take away my dignity or my peace. I would fight for my children, for my future, and for the life I knew I deserved. The days after the wives confronted me were filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. I was scared, scared for my children, scared for myself. But beneath that fear was a deep, burning need to protect my family, to stand up for us in ways I hadn't before. Chijioke might have left us behind, but I was still here. I was still their mother, and I would fight with everything I had to keep them safe. I decided it was time to take control. I couldn't let the wives tear me down, couldn't allow them to bully me into submission. I needed to be strategic, to think about how to keep them at bay while also protecting my children from the emotional damage they were trying to inflict. I spoke to my friend Ada again, seeking advice and support. Ada had always been wise, and she knew that I needed more than just moral support. I needed a plan. She suggested that I reach out to the elders in the village, people who had the respect and influence to mediate between Chijioke's wives and me. I was hesitant at first. After all, I didn't know how the elders would view the situation. Would they take my side, or would they side with Chijioke and his family? But Ada reminded me that I had nothing to lose. The only way to find peace was to confront the issue head-on. I gathered the courage to approach the village elders. The room was thick with the weight of their stares as I stood before them, explaining my situation. The women in the room especially looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and judgment. Some of them whispered to one another, as if trying to figure out how to respond. Others gave me knowing looks, as if they had seen this kind of thing happen too many times before. But one of the elder women, Mama Ifeoma, a woman I had known for years, stood up and addressed the room. Ngozi is a mother. She has been wronged, and now she must fight for her children, she said firmly. We cannot sit by and let this woman suffer at the hands of those who want to destroy her. We must find a way to bring peace to this situation. Her words were like a breath of fresh air. Finally, someone was standing up for me, acknowledging the pain and suffering I had endured. The other elders began to speak, and soon, a decision was made. They would call for a meeting with Chijioke and his wives to mediate the situation. This wasn't just about me, it was about my children and the life we deserve to have. I wasn't sure what to expect from the meeting, but I knew it was my only chance to put an end to the constant tension that had been suffocating me. When the day came, I gathered all my strength and walked into the room with my head held high. Chijioke was there, sitting in the corner with his wives, their faces hard and unreadable. I could feel the weight of their judgment on me, but I didn't flinch. This was my moment. Mama Ifeoma began the meeting, speaking first. We are here today to find a solution to this problem. We are not here to point fingers, but to ensure that all parties are treated fairly. Ngozi, as the mother of Chijioke's children, has every right to raise them without fear or interference from his other wives. Chijioke, you must understand that your actions have consequences, and you must take responsibility for those consequences. Chijioke remained silent, his eyes avoiding mine. I could feel the tension between us, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let him control me, let him dictate the course of my life. The elders had seen the truth, and now it was time for Chijioke and his wives to hear it too. His first wife spoke up, her voice dripping with venom. You have no right to tell us how to live our lives. Chijioke is our husband, and we will do whatever we must to protect him. You are the one who came into this family, not the other way around. I took a deep breath and met her gaze. I never asked to be a part of this. I never wanted to take anyone's place. But I will not let you tear my family apart. My children deserve better than this. They deserve a life where they are loved and respected. And I will do everything in my power to give them that. The second wife scoffed, rolling her eyes. You think you can stand against us? You think you can just walk away from this mess? You have no idea what you're up against. I didn't flinch. I know exactly what I'm up against. But I won't be intimidated. I won't let fear control me anymore. This is about my children, and I will fight for them. There was a long silence in the room. The tension was palpable. Chijioke still didn't say a word, his eyes downcast. It was as if he had no interest in resolving anything. But Mama Ifeoma spoke again, this time with authority. We will not allow any woman to bully another in this community. Chijioke, you are responsible for this situation. You must find a way to ensure that your children are cared for, and that their mother is not harassed or mistreated. If you cannot do this, then we will take further action. The words hung in the air like a thunderstorm ready to burst. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over the situation. I wasn't alone anymore. The elders were on my side, and they were making sure that Chijioke and his wives knew that their actions had consequences. The meeting ended with a sense of uneasy tension. Chijioke agreed to make sure that his children were supported, and that his wives would leave me alone. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. The battle wasn't over, but it was one step closer to peace. The days following the meeting with the elders felt surreal. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into a new phase of my life, one that was still uncertain, but filled with possibility. The confrontation with Chijioke's wives, though not fully resolved, had given me a sense of power that I had long lost. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. I knew that this wasn't the end. Chijioke's abandonment, his betrayal, the constant threats from his wives, all of that would continue to haunt me in some form. But I had learned something that day in the elders' meeting. I was not helpless. I didn't have to shrink away from these challenges. I could face them head-on, armed with the truth and the strength I had found within myself. In the weeks that followed, life gradually began to settle into a rhythm. Chijioke kept his word to the elders, sending money for the children's upkeep, though it was far from what we truly needed. The tension between his wives and me didn't disappear overnight, but the constant harassment stopped, at least for now. I had managed to carve out a small semblance of peace, and for that, I was grateful. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. I wanted more for my children. I wanted them to grow up knowing that they were worthy of love, that they didn't have to carry the weight of their father's neglect. I wanted them to see me as more than just a woman who had been abandoned. I wanted them to see me as a fighter, a woman who had refused to give up. The mornings were filled with the sounds of my children laughing as they played outside, their innocent joy a reminder of why I had to keep pushing forward. I spent my days working hard at the market, selling my fruits and vegetables, and slowly but surely, I began to save up for the future. I dreamed of opening a small shop, something that would provide for us in a way that Chijioke's sporadic support could never do. I wanted financial independence, something that would allow me to give my children a future where they wouldn't have to rely on anyone, especially not a man who had failed us. And then, one evening, as I was putting the children to bed, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a woman named Kechi, a distant cousin of mine, who had heard about my struggles and wanted to help. She worked in Lagos and had connections that could help me start the business I had always dreamed of. She had saved up some money and was willing to invest in me, to help me build a new life for myself and my children. I was overwhelmed with emotion. After everything I had been through, after all the pain, all the heartache, here was an opportunity to start anew. It was as if the universe had finally opened a door, offering me the chance I had been waiting for. My dreams of independence, of providing a better future for my children, were now within reach. The next few months were a blur of hard work and hope. With Nkechi's help, I was able to rent a small space in the market and begin selling not just fruits, but other goods, clothes, household items, and small accessories. Business was slow at first, but as word spread, more and more people began to come to my store. I worked tirelessly, day and night, building a reputation for myself as someone who was hardworking, dependable, and kind. Through all the long hours, I never lost sight of the goal. I wanted my children to have a life where they didn't have to worry about what tomorrow would bring. I wanted them to know that they were loved, and that they were not defined by the mistakes their father had made. As the months passed, I began to see the fruits of my labor. My business grew, and so did my confidence. I no longer felt like the woman who had been deceived and abandoned. I had transformed into someone new, a mother, an entrepreneur, and a woman who had taken control of her destiny. And then one day, as I was counting the money I had earned, I received another unexpected visit. It was Chijioke. He showed up at my store, looking disheveled and somewhat ashamed. I had not seen him in months, and part of me had hoped I would never see him again. But there he was, standing before me. "Ngozi," he said quietly. "I know I failed you. I know I've hurt you, and I've hurt the children. I'm sorry." I stared at him for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had destroyed my life. But another part of me realized that his apology was not for me, it was for him. He was trying to absolve himself of his guilt, trying to find peace with the decisions he had made. I took a deep breath, looking him in the eye. Chijioke, I don't need your apology. What I needed was for you to be the man you promised to be. But you weren't, and that's something I can't change. What matters now is the life I'm building for my children. What matters is that we're okay, that we're stronger than we've ever been. He seemed to understand, and without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, and for the first time, I felt nothing but indifference. Chijioke no longer had the power to control my emotions. He was a part of my past, a chapter 1 was finally ready to close. As I watched my children play outside the shop that evening, I knew that I had come a long way. The road had been painful, but I had emerged stronger. I had learned that life would not always go as planned, that people would hurt you, but that didn't mean you had to stay down. I had learned that I was enough, that my worth was not tied to the actions of others, and that I had the power to create the future I wanted. In the end, I realized that the greatest gift I could give my children was not just a better life, but the strength to never let anyone define their worth. And as I looked at them, I knew I had succeeded. We were a family, and together, we would face whatever came next.